Hi everyone, it's Jerome from MezFi. Welcome to the latest episode of MezFi Meets. We're here today with Lachlan from Labris. How are you doing, mate?
Great to be here, Jerome.
All right. Well, today Locke is from Labris, as I said, which is one of the preeminent, if not the preeminent, in my opinion, Web3 development company in Australia, and certainly very well known around the world. As a disclaimer, Labris have done a lot of work for MezFi. They've helped us to develop the blockchain platform part of the MezFi platform. I met Lockie early on in my journey with all of this. I think I found Labris. I like to tell people this actually. I found Labris on some kind of a Google search. They didn't even have a phone number at the time, and I got through some backdoor way into. I can't even remember how I contacted you guys. It all felt very speakeasy or something, and it was a great introduction into what's been a really great journey so far. Why don't you introduce yourself a bit further than that? Maybe tell us a bit about how you started in Web3 and software development, and how your journey's been so far.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks for the intro, Jerome. Super excited to be here. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Lachlan. I'm the founder and CEO of Labris. Labris is a Web3 development studio based in Australia, and we're the largest onshore Web3 dev studio in Australia. There's a lot of things we can sort of get into regarding Labris and my background. I got involved in the blockchain space probably just over 10 years ago now, I think. So
that's a long time.
I've been here for a while. Started Labris about 7 years ago, and the industry has changed so much and so drastically since then. I would love to get into a lot of that, but we essentially we build products. We work with companies like MezFi all across the globe. We've worked on some of the largest sort of Web3 projects in the space, and we just build really cool stuff, pretty much.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I've certainly found along my journey that you guys get really excited about, building really cool stuff. And it seems like, every day that goes on, there's more and more cool stuff coming out in the space. Without breaching confidentiality, what's the most exciting project that you guys have worked on over your journey in with Labris?
Yeah, so confidentiality is the hard part, because sort of in what we do, a lot of the most exciting projects that we work on, we can't really talk about.
Of course.
So we as I said, we've been doing this for about 7 years now. I'm not sure if you know this, Jerome, but we originally didn't start as a software dev studio. We were originally doing product.
I didn't know.
And maybe we can get into some of that. But since we've been doing sort of services, we've worked on pretty much every different type of project. Like, some of the most exciting stuff we've done is probably within the gaming industry. We've done. I'm a gamer myself. Grew up sort of playing games and that sort of thing. We've done some work with Cloud9, the esports team,
cool.
And some pretty well-known large game development studios that I can't sort of really get into. Of the ones that I can talk about, of course, MezFi, very exciting project that we've been involved in. But yeah, we've done like some people may know Swell and Swell networks. So we wrote all of the smart contracts for the Swell network protocol. For those who aren't familiar with Swell network, it's a liquid staking derivatives protocol or liquid staking token protocol on Ethereum. So if you have ETH and you want to stake it but don't have 32 to stake at the protocol level, you can stake smaller amounts with Swell. So we wrote the smart contracts that enable that platform. I'm not sure exactly off the top of my head, but I think there's close to $1 billion sitting in those smart contracts that we wrote, which is pretty cool, but also pretty scary at the same time.
Well, it's hence why guys like Hashlock that we've recently had a conversation with are so important to audit all of the smart contracts that you guys built. By the way, and I'm not sure if they gave me permission to say this, but whether they do or not, I'm sure they'd be happy to. They did give you a massive rap and say that Labris, the contracts are absolutely, we won't say watertight, but basically you guys write extremely good, extremely strong contracts. So yeah, big tick from that perspective.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. So, yeah, we've done plenty of work with the Ashlock team. They're an awesome team as well of Aussie smart contract auditors and security researchers. So, yeah, you really have to be sort of working in this space. You can't. There's such little room for error. Like if we get something wrong, or the auditors get something wrong, it's literally the end of that company. Like in many cases, it's just unrecoverable, which is obviously a huge difference from building a Web2 business. These are not usually things you have to think about. If you have a bug in a Web2 product, you can have some pretty bad bugs, but you rarely consider or think about a bug that would literally end your company overnight. Whereas in the Web3 space, that's like that's the sort of default position that you go into projects with, that things have to be absolutely watertight.
Is that because our industry is so nascent, and you're dealing a lot of the time with startups where reputation is king, and if the reputation goes even slightly well, there's always another startup that comes along and replaces them, as opposed to say in Web2 world. These. Well, look, I mean, I'm thinking about things like the Optus data breach, for instance. It's not the end of Optus, because that's what happened to them. Obviously, it's a size thing too. Like Optus is so huge that having something like that happen hasn't just totally killed them, as opposed to say if some startup telephone company had that happen to them. I imagine it would have ended them just as much as what happens in Web3. Obviously, we're talking about dollars and cents on the line as opposed to data, which is a difference. So in that respect, I guess we're all sort of guinea pigs, or you guys are anyway. I'm not a dev, so thank gosh for that. That it's not me that's having to develop this. But maybe from that perspective, we're all guinea pigs in the financial services or the pseudo financial services industry, because I can imagine that if we're talking about the developers of the Swift network, for instance, and there was an exploit on the Swift network, and one of the banks lost $10 million from a vulnerability, it would be just as swiftly their end as what a lot of these protocols face as well, I guess.
Yeah, so there's definitely the reputation aspect to it in our industry. Like it's a new industry, and so various different companies are sort of vying for the market segments. But I think that the main thing, or the main concern is sort of that financial aspect and the irreversibility of
True.
the blockchain. So it depends what you're doing. Like protocols that are entirely on chain are much more problematic than protocols that are sort of semi on chain, semi in the real world, such as MezFi, where you have like, you know, real world assets and these sorts of things and representing them on chain. In protocols that are entirely on chain, if something, well, I guess one way to put it is if you're dealing with real world assets or something off chain, if the chain does not, if there's a hack and someone steals the tokens, which may be a claim to an off chain asset, you could, in theory, just refuse to allow them to redeem those tokens when they come to claim them because they were hacked. In entirely on-chain contracts, there's no, for the most part, no concept of that. So the example I gave of Swell Network before, there's over $1 billion of, or roughly, I think somewhere around that number, of Ether sitting in those smart contracts that we developed. So if there was a vulnerability in those smart contracts, potentially someone could come along, suck out the entire $1 billion worth of Ether, and there's nothing that you could do about that. You can't, you can't reverse the transactions. You can't,
so scary.
Go to the Ethereum Foundation and say, "Hey, we were hacked. Can you please fix this?" So it is a huge challenge, and part of the problem as well. It gets a little bit more complicated here, but smart contracts, not only are they not or typically not reversible, but they're also typically not upgradable. So there is such a thing as an upgradable smart contract. So, technically you can patch code and vulnerabilities, but it's not as straightforward as you would think. So usually the situation that you have is you can have a bug, you can know there's a bug in your code where people could potentially steal money out of it, but there's nothing that you can do about it. You can know it's there, but if you can't upgrade your contracts, there's nothing you can do.
It's crazy, isn't it? Like in a lot of ways, and like I'm one of the biggest blockchain advocates out there, but in a lot of ways, there are parts of blockchain and parts of Web3 which make you think that this isn't, the way of the future, so to speak, because these are kinds of things that we haven't, it feels very Wild West. You know what I mean? Like we're going back to a time where, there's no policing, there's no ability to call a judge in and say, hey, this was mine, and have someone actually recover it. No, it's immutable and it's lost, which feels, and I think that's why a lot of people are so scared to get into Web3 because of that kind of the money's gone and it's gone kind of thing. Do you foresee any, sort of way in the future to merge that sort of safer way that the traditional sort of system developed for good reason over time, to be able to sort of give that, peace of mind to people? Because I don't see how we can grow and actually develop our systems that we're so proud of, and that, do so many great things to be scalable at the level that we want them to, without that kind of peace of mind that people have in their old legacy systems.
Yeah, so I think one of the most important parts about the blockchain, and the reason why the blockchain is so critical and such an important sort of invention, is it gives us this absolute sort of unyielding foundation where if we really want to, for those particular use cases where we absolutely have to have it, you can build absolutely irreversible, totally self-custodial systems where you really do want protocols that can't be changed and upgraded. So that is there's a lot of value in that.
Well, what
And
are those
that
things though? What exactly? What are the use cases, for instance, that you want that for? I mean, I can't even think of it, to be honest with you. Like, what is that necessary for? Like, what is it?
we can get into that. I'm happy to have that argument.
Okay, sure.
But I just want to make my first point, which is you can't that sort of immutability, you can't add that back on top. It's something that can't
Sure.
be added back in later. You can't on the internet that already has this entire infrastructure, you can't just build like a Web2 app on the internet with immutability.
Yeah,
This is why we've had to
sure.
start from scratch with a whole new
I understand.
network.
Yeah, I
But
understand.
when you have that foundation, you can absolutely build things in on top of that, which give you an experience much similar to Web2, where the immutability and these sorts of things aren't as critical. So, as I mentioned, whilst the default case with smart contracts is that they're not upgradable, you
Yeah,
can, if you plan for it, build upgradable smart contracts, and that
yeah,
gives you more control over things, and you can set who should be able to upgrade them, who has those permissions, who doesn't. You can build, so one of the very exciting sort of developments happening in the space at the moment is account abstraction. So the Ethereum blockchain in its next hard fork upgrade, which will likely be sort of early 2025, is doing a complete overhaul to the way wallets and accounts work. And this is going to make the experience so that if you don't want to manage private keys or you don't want to deal with gas or any of these things, they could be completely abstracted away so that
wow,
you could be interacting with a Web3 app without even knowing what Ether is or knowing what a wallet or private key is or any of these things. So the Web3 industry and gets accused all the time, and we certainly do as developers. You get accused all the time of not understanding design or UX or these sorts of things. Are going, oh, this is all just built by engineers who have no idea how to build good products, and it's all terrible and hard to use. And we, for the most part, acknowledge that right now. It is hard to use. It is a difficult technology. But
yeah,
once you get into the weeds of it, you understand why it has to be built in this sort of order. So the end goal is to get to Web3 applications that are just as easy to build and to use and to maintain as Web2 applications. But we have to get the decentralization right first, and then we add all these sort of layers of abstraction on top over time.
okay. I see your point. I definitely understand what your point is, and it is true certainly that the way that blockchain operates today could not be built on the internet or the Web2 sort of layer. Certainly, we needed this to be built this way. That is 100% true. I guess going back to the question that I had before, in your opinion, what are the kinds of things that do require immutability? And yeah, I guess what are those things in your opinion? Because it's hard to sort of see, apart from, of course, terrorist funding, which is, of course, you want that to be immutable so that you can't get, so that the money that you give to terrorists can't be taken away out of their hands, 100%. Disclaimer: I'm not proposing that we should terrorist fund, but tongue in cheek, of course. But what kinds of things are there? Just like tornado cash, we say there's a lot of maxis that are like, oh, tornado cash. It's such a shame that we can't use it anymore. And the knock on it is, what would you use Tornado Cash for except for laundering money? And so that's my question, I guess.
Yeah, this would be fun. Yeah, there's many different use cases. I happen to think that money is a good use case for blockchain. I think it's worthwhile experimenting about. We can talk more about that if you want to, but I think money is ultimately, it's a technology. It's how we keep score of who's done what labor and who owes who what and these sorts of things. And it hasn't particularly been something that's been innovated on in hundreds of years.
Certainly not.
I think there are some, just like anything else, benefits from innovation and competition. I think there's a reasonable argument to say that it's at least worthwhile experimenting with some better money. In the case of Tornado Cash, obviously I'm not going to defend North Korea laundering millions of dollars through
Billions,
there
probably,
and
let's be
using
honest.
it in billions, sure. But for me, it always has kind of been odd just how public the whole blockchain thing is. Like, if you use it as money, so my business, like Labris, for example, we do accept under certain circumstances payments from customers in crypto. And I have my own crypto, I spend it, all of these sorts of things. It's kind of weird thinking about that, like in the money sense, as a bank account that everyone can see. Like, I think if there was a proposal for, would everyone be in favor of allowing total transparency in everyone's bank account? So I could look up your bank account, Jerome, see how much money's in there. I could see exactly what you're spending money on.
Certainly not.
People obviously wouldn't be in favor of that.
No.
But that is exactly what Tornado Cash enables on Ethereum. If you want to have private wallets, they are, of course, public, at least for the moment in Ethereum. But as soon as, if you're sending money in from a doxed wallet, there's no way to do that without, like, then your new wallet is tracked to your old wallet, sort of thing. So there's no way to actually have a private sort of bank account on Ethereum without using a service like Tornado Cash. So is it used for nefarious purposes? Absolutely. But I still think that, like, we should have a right to privacy, and there should be a way to enable that on the blockchain. I think my guess on sort of where it goes is you probably end up with a system where there's, say, a layer 2, like its own blockchain network, which is totally private, where you can't see people's balances and those sorts of things. But maybe you have to get KYC'd and the funds have to get AML checked and these sorts of things to get into the network. So you can do a check on the way in, make sure that there's no bad actors, make sure that the money trail where it came from pre-entering the network was legit. And then within the network, you could have a little bit of privacy. So there's different projects and teams working on that. But
that's a super interesting point, actually.
Yeah, and I think there are, like, use cases and reasons to have privacy, reasons to have immutability, and all of these sorts of things which blockchain provide. It doesn't mean, like, obviously everything shouldn't be on the blockchain. Obviously everything shouldn't be totally private and everything else. And not every use case requires these sort of extreme technologies. But I don't think we should just write it all off and go, oh, we never need privacy, or we never need immutability, or these sorts of things.
I love it. I love it. So to be clear, I mean, I'm playing devil's advocate a bit on this. just for fun. Certainly, I understand the need for privacy. I think what you're saying from the perspective of having perhaps an AML wallet where you track source of funds and then you're able to transact in a private manner makes the most sense. And look, also from the immutability point of view, I totally understand why people want immutability and why, let's be honest, the Bitcoin network and its essence and its raison d'être, for lack of a better word, came about because of distrust of government, and so immutability is necessary to stop governments from seizing our money, obviously. And so from that perspective, I guess Bitcoin version of the Second Amendment in America, isn't it? Where it's like, they can't take our guns. We have to be able to have, our money in the case of a government going rogue, so to speak, so that they can't touch it. Which, I'm not an advocate for guns, but I see the point of view. Certainly, if there was a government that wanted to go against, its people, having your own guns and having the ability to form a militia in rebellion is important, just as having money that's free from government intervention in the case of a government that's that's bad is also potentially important. I guess it's just how much trust we have in the government, which in a lot of cases is zero. Actually, I guess I'm sort of halfway, because I'm still working in the financial services sector, having to get licensing and all this sort of stuff. But so I totally see your point. I obviously do. I'm just really interested to hear another person's viewpoint on it, and you articulated it extremely well, for sure.
Yeah, no, I'm always happy to take on the hard questions, but yeah, I think I don't really want to make a statement either way on guns, but I think when it comes to money, I'm not one of these guys that thinks it should be forced legal tender like El Salvador or whatever, where businesses should have to accept Bitcoin or these sorts of things. But I think it's a reasonable argument to make that most other things benefit from competition, from innovation. The technology that we have now is leaps and bounds better than the technology we had when we invented fiat currencies and paper money and these sorts of things. And
definitely,
why not at least try and experiment with it and see if we can make better forms of money?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I think the experiment is worthwhile. It's been, wildly successful, probably beyond anything that anyone would have imagined 15 years ago. The value of the Bitcoin network today, the value of all cryptocurrencies together being over $1.5 trillion, mind blowing, where we're at today. And yeah, I guess it's just crazy to think where we could be in 10 years from now. What's okay? So on the topic of extremely controversial questions, let's go another one. What's your view on CBDCs? Do you think they're good? Do you think they're bad? Do you think it depends?
Yeah, look, I'm not a huge fan of CBDCs. I'm not gonna sit here and defend them. I personally, I think CBDCs are going to be very hard to get off the ground moving forward, just because of the reputational hit that they've already sort of taken. I don't think I've ever seen a technology or I don't know what you would call it, a system, a protocol, or whatever, an idea that has been so heavily attacked and received such poor press before it has even got close to implementation.
True
it doesn't even exist yet, and there's already regulations and laws been passed around the world from various governments saying that they won't implement it or won't allow it, and others that are trying to work on it and different things. So I personally, I think CBDCs are dead in the water. If
Interesting.
there might be different governments who do work on blockchain based currencies and these sorts of things that may effectively end up being CBDCs anyway, but I don't think they will be called CBDCs. The marketing and the PR behind that has just killed that term in my opinion. But yeah, I don't think I don't think they're good for consumers or the general public, and I don't actually think they offer that much extra value to governments over the existing system. There's no real reason for it to be on a blockchain if you're because they wouldn't allow the immutability aspect. The transactions would have to be reversible, and so I think it's more just about a common sort of standard payments rails is sort of what they're interested in, and obviously the insight into what people's spending and how much money they have and where it is. And you can go further down the rabbit hole of then going
That's
and then
the scary
giving them
part,
the
for
power
sure.
to stop you spending your money under certain conditions and whatever else. I don't think it's going to happen. I think the PR is already too bad. And to be honest, I think if you look at most of the central banks have sort of done research into the CBDC area, and most of the conclusions come back and sort of say it's like, yeah, it's kind of cool, but it's not really something we're actively looking at anyway. So yeah, it's probably a little bit of an overblown topic.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it surprises me, and it doesn't how controversial CBDCs are. I mean, any tool in a particular government's hands is only as bad as the government is at what it does, and and its intentions. Obviously, in certain certain governments, we won't name them. There may be more nefarious activities that happen with CBDCs than with, say, our own. But I hear your point, and yeah, it has hit a wrap already. That's for sure. Look, what about let's back off the let's back off the controversy for a moment. Let's go back to coding for a second, because one thing that I'm super interested in, and I don't know anything about, is coding for the Ethereum virtual machine, Solidity coding, which I think is the bulk of what you guys do, if I'm not mistaken. For anyone that doesn't know, I guess like me, about coding for smart contracts on Ethereum, and whether maybe there is a difference between that and, say, other languages, other chains. How is coding? The question is how is coding different for Ethereum than it is, say, in traditional C, C++, Python, whatever it is, and what are those differences? And as far as I understand it anyway, and maybe you can speak to this, there's only like a real handful of really quality Solidity coders in the world. And how did you guys decide to that's what we're going to be focused on as far as a product goes? And yeah, I guess that's kind of the question.
Yeah, so I think when it comes to so what we'll call like Solidity and developing smart contracts, we'll put that in the bucket of Web3 development, and then all sort of other software development we'll call Web2 development. In terms of actually writing the code, it's very, very similar. So it's really not that different at all to write Solidity and Web3 code versus writing Web2 code. If you're a proficient Web2 engineer, you should be able to pick up the syntax and sort of writing smart contracts relatively easily on the Web3 side. Now, where it differs dramatically and sort of what you were getting at, it's not necessarily the syntax or how you write it or the tools or these sorts of things, but it's the way of thinking that differs so differently with Web3 development versus Web2 development. And some of this sort of comes back to what I was explaining before about bugs and vulnerabilities and the sort of room for error there. So in Web2 development, and Web2 development sort of gone through, we don't have hours to sit here today and talk about the history of software development methodologies, but software development originally started out very much like engineering development. Like when you build a bridge or a building, there's no tolerance for error, right? It's like everything has to have multiple redundancies built in. Your math, everything has to be absolutely perfect. And so software development and Web 2 and even going back Web 1 development started off this way because most of the early software engineers were sort of engineers, or that was the project management sort of line of thinking at the time. And so the way we would write software is we would spend months or even years sort of planning and designing these software systems the same way you would plan or design building a bridge. And then once we figured out every single little detail, we would go and we would write the software. Now, sort of in the early to sort of mid to late sort of 2000s, that line of thinking changed to now what we call agile software development, which is the total opposite. So we sort of worked out with software development, at least in Web 2, that unlike a bridge or a building, if there's a bug, you can push out a software update over the air and instantly everyone's software can be patched and that bug goes away. And so once companies started figuring this out, they very quickly realized like the best software development companies, the companies who were first to market, who had the best software, were the ones who could move the quickest, who abandoned this idea of planning for months in advance to just smashing stuff out as quickly as possible, because if something goes wrong, you can just patch it and that's fine. And so that then became the dominant sort of development methodology for Web 2 and still is the dominant methodology for Web 2 development today. And we still have to spend a ton of time drilling this into our clients, that particularly when we're doing the Web 2 development, like we just want to get straight in there and just smash stuff out. It's the most, you still do lose a little bit to efficiency, but what you lose to that, you save on less planning without development. You still need to plan, obviously, but it works out more efficient in the long run. Where things differ with Web3 is we're almost sort of going back to building the bridge or the building scenario, where we're going back to zero tolerance for error. If there's a bug, patching becomes either not possible or very difficult to do. And so we need to plan a lot more. We need to be a lot more careful. We need to go and get audits done. We need to slow the pace down and consider all of these things. And therein lies sort of one of the most challenging parts of sort of working in or running a sort of development agency in the Web3 space, is because it is similar to write to Web 2, as I said at the start. Like a Web 2 engineer should be pretty quickly able to pick up Web3 sort of software development.
Of course.
You have all these agencies and all of these sort of developers jumping into the Web3 space and saying, oh, we're now Web3 developers. But they're still taking that sort of agile process to Web3. And this is where everything goes wrong. This is where projects have bugs and vulnerabilities, and people go after sort of, because you can get cheaper development and all of these sorts of things. But you're sort of taking the wrong principles into that line of development. So in terms of those who are actually really good at building smart contracts with the right procedures, practices, methodologies, and have written code that has secured, billions of dollars worth of funds without being hacked, there are very, very few of those sort of engineers around.
And you guys are one of them.
Yeah, we certainly try to be. It's an enormous challenge because we're entirely based onshore here in Australia as well. So that was one of the things,
which is wonderful, by the way. Which is one of the things that I thought was amazing about you guys as well. I think I had got some quotes from a company that had most of their team offshore. I think it was in the Philippines. But I love that you guys are 100% onshore in Australia, by the way, for anyone that wants to know.
Yeah, and that was a very, for us, that was a very deliberate decision because in this industry, like you have to be able to control your quality. It's the most important thing.
For sure.
And for us, that's just much easier to do. We can have much more control over it when it's done onshore as opposed to outsourced overseas. Obviously, you can get access to cheaper development and more engineers overseas. And, if I was running a Web2 agency, maybe that would be the way to go, or it certainly probably would be more profitable doing it that way. But when it comes to Web3, in the long run, I don't really think that's an option, or it certainly wasn't from us. There are obviously a lot of successful sort of multinational Web3 companies, but for us and what we do, it had to be done here because that really gave us the best chance to maintain that quality. And for us as well, sort of scaling up, because we want to grow, we want to become bigger, we want to work on as many projects as we can. We had to be able to scale as well, and there's simply not enough good Web3 engineers out there to just go and hire Web3 engineers. So a lot of what we do as well is finding really good Web2 engineers with that sort of mindset that I think works well for Web3 and bringing them in and training them and skilling them up on the Web3 development side of things. And for us, I think that's worked very well doing that sort of onshore.
Awesome. Well, let me ask you one final question then. For anyone that's listening to this podcast who has an interest in becoming a Web3 developer, what do you do to start their journey?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's like you do need to know the basics of software development. I have met a few people who have gone straight into Web3, and you certainly can do that, although I think it probably helps a little bit if you have some understanding of Web2. But you just need to get out there and start learning, playing around, writing some smart contracts and these sorts of things. One of the biggest advantages of the Web3 space is because it's all about open source everything's public and all of these sorts of things. There's so many free resources out there on sort of learning Solidity and Web3 development. So there's lots of places that you can go to find that. The other thing, and one of the sort of most interesting parts about the Web3 development as well is there's a very big focus on standards, this is sort of tying back into some of the previous conversations. One of the reasons why there's a very big focus on standards is because of security, because if you have one smart contract that has $1 billion in it and hasn't been hacked, and you want to do something similar, you're probably going to fork or copy that contract and bring it over here and use it for your use case. And that's encouraged in the Web3 space. In fact, if you don't fork and take that code over there and use it for yourself that's already been audited, you're an idiot. Like you're doing something wrong. You're taking on so much extra risk by rewriting the contract, because your version is going to be slightly different. You're going to have to get it audited again. You add all these extra risks and so on. So there's a huge focus on standards, and there's very few standards. And for a lot of the Web3 development that you're doing, like you should be trying to write as little code as possible and using as many of these pre-developed standards as possible. So, if you're starting out on Web3 development, you probably start with some of these standards. The most popular ones are like the token standard contracts, like ERC20, ERC721, ERC1155. You can take a look at those smart contracts and try and fork one and deploy it and so on. But yeah, you want to start playing around. I think you need to, you probably do want to try and go and get a job somewhere if you want to work in the space. You don't need to be, this expert with 10 years worth of experience in Solidity to land a job in the space. You can be relatively new. It's one of the advantages of such a new technology is there aren't, people with 50 years experience in the field. So you can get a job with relatively little experience, but you have to keep in that mindset of not falling into that trap of going, oh, I deployed an ERC20 contract and it took me 5 minutes and now I'm a Solidity engineer. I'm going to start contracting myself out. You very quickly sort of fall into that trap of thinking you're sort of an expert very early on. And then eventually you work out that's not the case. And then you sort of work out, actually, I have no idea what's going on. And then once you get past that, you eventually start to sort of, work a bit more out as you go. But it is, you can get in as a junior engineer. There's tons of resources available online. So yeah, just jump in and get started.
Nice one. Well, thanks so much, Lockie, for having the chat today. It's been a great conversation, controversial at times, and educational at others. But really enjoyed the chat. Thanks so much for coming on today, and really look forward to maybe having you on again. Talking about token standards, there's other things that that I could have asked and I was thinking about asking, but I'll save it for next time. So we'll drop all the links for Labris in the notes below the video, and for anyone who wants to check them out. Otherwise, have a great day, mate, and thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Jerome.
All right, cheers. Have a good one. Thanks for watching. If you want to find out more about MezFi, go to www.mezfi.com. Follow us on X, YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. You can see our shorts there. And
look forward to the next conversation and see you then.